Nioh 2 is the greatest action game of all time, according to me. Welcome to my channel, by the way. There's a problem though. It just so happens that there's a game that came before Nioh 2, a wonderful, magical game that is simply called Nioh. Could you imagine that? And Nioh banged, Nioh slapped, but somehow, some way, most people, it feels like, don't even realize this game exists. Like the first game just doesn't register with people for some reason, almost as if this series started with 2, and it kind of blows my mind. Like, I'll casually ask a player about the first game and just be stunned when I hear them respond with, "The what?" Like, do you want me to hurt you? Because I will. It's also a common question of newcomers to the series. They come into my streams and the comment sections wondering if they should try the first game, if they're fine with starting Nioh 2, will they be missing anything, and so on and so on. The next segment of this video is aimed at those folks, but also I'm side-eyeing you lunatics who just don't get that the 2 in Nioh 2 means that it's a sequel. Jesus. And so, let's get the big questions out of the way. Yes, Nioh is 100% worth getting. Yes, even if you've already played the second one to death and back and beyond, these two games are different enough that they can hold up on their own merits and provide you a unique experience even if you have hundreds of hours in the other game. No, you don't actually need to play Nioh 1 first. It's fine if you played the sequel already. The game you tackle first is not all that important. It's fine no matter the order you play because you won't be spoiled or you won't miss anything, because timeline-wise, Nioh 2 actually happens first. So in some respects, it's probably good that you already played Nioh 2. Now go play Nioh 1. I decided to dust off my own copy of the original Nioh and do a playthrough of it. Initially, I just wanted to revisit the game for nostalgia's sake because it had been a few years since I last played the game. I was gonna play a few areas on stream, have a nice trip down memory lane, then call it a day. Except I didn't. Several weeks and playthroughs later, I'm knee deep in the late post game now and I need an adult. Frankly, I didn't think I'd enjoy going back to Nioh 1 as much as I did. And so now we get to have a yap session about my thoughts on the game and how it holds up versus the GOAT Nioh 2. And well, I've put a lot of time into Nioh 2. I'm unironically on the verge of making a this is what X 100,000 hours of Nioh really look like, and I'm not kidding. I was starting to think that I was actually decent at this game. So imagine my surprise when I did get back to my roots with the first Nioh, and it wasn't immediate, but as I started getting into the late game, and especially the later New Game Plus cycles, I noticed something. Nioh hates you. I made a video a little while back, lovingly saying that Ninja Gaiden hates you and wants you to die, and I'm gonna go ahead and extend that to Nioh 1 as well. When I played Ninja Gaiden, one thing I noticed very quickly is how the game nonstop pressed you with enemies. In battle, the default speed, you could say, was 3 enemies minimum at all times, aiming at your throat, and you having to constantly contend with those enemies. Even the boss fights had 2 grunts spawn that was ready to take your head off. And these weren't regular trash mobs pressing you at all hours of the day in the game. These were elite quality enemies and even mini boss level threats that you face in other games, but they just so happen to be your usual walk in the park for Mr. Ryu Hayabusa. Nioh 1 absolutely, absolutely adopted these psychotic tendencies. By having so many threats on screen, it's obvious Nioh 1 took Ninja Gaiden's never stop moving policy, and it's something you absolutely do not see in Nioh 2. Like, yeah, sure. It will occasionally have you fight a tough enemy with some lesser enemies, but usually it staggers them out so that you never really face more than one serious threat at a time. Meanwhile, Nioh 1 will throw 5 or 6 of them on screen at once and wish you the best of luck. Wish you. Who am I kidding? You can almost hear the devs laughing in the background and saying, "Should we add another monster for good measure?" And it's astounding. I'm impressed. This isn't to say that Nioh 2 is an easy game, not at all. There are a lot of players that get filtered on the first stage of this game. It's definitely hard, and I'm not diminishing that at all, but Nioh 1, again, is another level of psychotic. I remember dying a lot in Nioh 1, but the deaths in Nioh 2 were far fewer. Like I said, I thought I was getting better. No, it's the devs pulling their punches, because if they really wanted, things could be so much more worse, and I can clearly see that with the first game. And a big part of the difference in difficulty can also be attributed to the additions and overall improvements that Nioh 2 made. I'll glaze the game for a moment and say that Nioh 2 is one of the best sequels I've ever played. Everything the first game had, they made better in the sequel, and then they built on top of that. Everything, that is, unless you're a living weapon addict. They could never balance that mechanic in Nioh 1, so they scrapped it entirely for Nioh 2, and rest in piss, you won't be missed. I never cared for that mechanic. I agree, it was broken. To the point that I still didn't actually use it when I returned to Nioh 1, despite thinking I'd give it more of a chance. But everything else in Nioh 1 came back to Nioh 2, but better. For example, in Nioh 2, the original weapon types got some massive upgrades, to the point where my beloved Tonfa is literally unplayable to me in the first game because of the changes they made to both Kanagi and Demon Dance, making that weapon so much more smoother in that sequel. And Spear, with its mobility upgrades and Rainbow Rules and so on, is so sorely missed that I didn't really use the Spear as much as I would have liked. Even with the unnerfed version of Wild Spear that Nioh 1 offers, it's just an overall better weapon in Nioh 2. It's not bad across the board though. Odachi, for example, feels about the same, honestly. It lacking bolting bore and swirling snow that exist in 2, it wasn't nearly as bad as, say, the loss of the spear's mobility, for example. And Kusarigama, of all things, feels a lot funner in 1 over 2. Oh, and Katana just feels like heaven with move speed boost stacked to the moon. Oh, I want to stop and just say move speed stacking, especially with the sword, is the most fun I've ever had in this game. It is peak in ways I cannot describe. I can only show you the madness here. Watch the showcases in the background. 1 second. In Nioh 1, you can stack same type buffs. In Nioh 2, the stronger buff wins. So, if you try to apply, say, attack up, the 20% attack buff would overwrite the 10% attack buff you had, and only the stronger one would function. In Nioh 1, you could have both working simultaneously. This led to Nioh 1 being full of one-shot builds, unfortunately, because allowing the player to stack attack buffs like that to the moon, very few can resist. One-shot builds became the meta, and people justified it because the game is balls to the wall hard, and people struggle to cope with the madness in-game Nioh 1 throws at you. Overall, I agree with the change to buff stacking in Nioh 2. However, do you see how fast I'm moving in these clips? Stacking movement speed bonuses is genuinely the most fun I've had in Nioh 1. It was so addicting. Just yesterday, I went back to Nioh 2 after weeks of playing Nioh 1, and I thought my game was bugged. I thought I was lagging. I was moving so slow and the enemies were too, but nothing was wrong. I was just moving at the normal speed of the game, and I was stun-locked for a moment trying to process just how different things were. And when I realized it, I felt like I had superpowers because everything was so slow, I could process the gameplay so much easier. It was weird. It was amazing. I feel like I unlocked a cheat for getting better at 2. I want to do that again. I want to go a few days playing Nioh 1 at max speed, and then swap to 2 again to experience the speed withdrawals. Oh, but back to buffing. A really popular misconception is that Nioh 1 is a broken mess. I would argue it's not. It's just hard. Really, really hard. So much so that it pushes people to make overpowered builds to deal with it. But really, it's hard to accidentally become broken in this game. It has to be done with player intent to be broken. Even with how strong Living Weapon is, you can't simply pop Living Weapon and expect it to carry you. You'll just die, typically. You need actual in-game knowledge, or I guess a guide or a YouTube video to tell you the exact combination you need to dominate Nioh's highest NG cycles, and especially the Abyss. You could say, hey Uncle Shape, that's not the case. On my playthrough, this isn't about your first playthrough, Timmy. You can use anything in the first playthrough and be fine. My William ran butt naked for the first few regions, not out of challenge or voyeurism, but because I can't be bothered to fumble around with gear in these games till I have the set that I want. Anything until then is a waste of time for me. So if you can get through the base game butt naked, yeah, Living Weapon and whatever else will look strong by comparison, but strong does not equal broken. Broken happens when you start one-shotting bosses, and that is something very possible with Nioh 1's stacking situation. Devs allow buffs to stack, but They didn't have the foresight to imagine players stacking 20 buffs and debuffs to delete bosses in 2 seconds. This isn't a game being a broken mess problem. This is a players being bad at the game and creating a solution instead of just getting good. The same thing is possible in games like Elden Ring, for example, where you can use Comet Azure to burst down bosses in seconds. You just need to take a sip of a flask and you're good to go. There's also one-shot melee builds there, but that game isn't nearly as hard, so the prevalent strategy is not to do that, actually. And I wouldn't call Elden Ring a broken mess, even though you can achieve those same results. And that's it. I've yapped enough. I just recently played through Nioh 1 Into the Abyss and wanted to share a few thoughts. If anyone is thinking of playing Nioh 1 or whether or not you should skip it, listen to me. Listen to my words. Go get it, it's fun. It's worth it. It's different. If you're curious which I think is better between the two, well, I made a video on it already, but Nioh 2 all the way. It is the greatest action game of all time. As much as I enjoyed the difficulty of 1, the sheer amount of upgrades and quality of life improvements and just sheer customization and all that you see in Nioh 2 just make it the overall better game. If you're trying to pick between the two, I'd say get 2, but if you're wondering if both are worthwhile, or you're a Nioh 2 vet that's never played Nioh 1, you're missing out, and you can't go wrong visiting the origins of that series. I appreciate you guys for watching. All the footage is pulled from my live stream on Twitch. Also, I stream on YouTube now. I stream daily if you want to drop by and yap about Nioh with me or other random stuff. I also have a Discord for extended yapping. Links in the description. Yeah, thanks for watching. Love you. Peace.